life lived for tomorrow will always be just a day away from being realized. Leo Buscaglia. Let's be fair. Preparation matters. Nobody wants to be reckless. Nobody wants to charge forward without thinking things through. We all understand that planning is responsible and that preparation improves the outcomes. But have you ever noticed how easy it is to convince yourself that you're making progress when nothing has actually changed? You'll read another article, watch another video, listen to another voice who seems to know what they're talking about. Maybe you take a few notes. Maybe you formulate a plan. Maybe you even create a timeline for when you're finally going to start and when you should be done. And at least up to a point, things feel good. But the difficult part is being able to recognize when preparation stops helping and starts hiding something. Because the line isn't always obvious. Think about the last time you wanted to start something new. A project at work, a new workout routine. Or what about having that difficult conversation? The one you knew you needed to do. Did you actually need more information? Or did you just need to step across the line and do it? There's a noticeable friction that happens when we get stuck in the loop of getting ready to get ready. Spreadsheets can look perfect. The calendar can be color-coded. And the research actually starts getting redundant. Yet, nothing has actually changed. We've never had more access to information than we do right now. Answers are everywhere. Advice is everywhere. For almost anything you want to do, there's courses, books, YouTube videos, experts. It's all available when we want it. But the truth we often avoid is that research phase has an expiration date. Past a certain point, more planning doesn't bring more certainty. It likely just builds more anxiety. Yet somehow, many of us can still feel stuck. We just never seem to arrive at the moment where preparation turns into execution. On the other hand, this isn't about rushing blindly into a wall or ignoring the reality of the demands of our lives. It's about recognizing that there's a moment where preparation stops being a tool and starts becoming a hiding place. But we also have to be honest with ourselves. There's something comforting about preparation. When you're thinking things through, when you're planning, doing all your research, and organizing everything, it can feel like you're doing something productive. And oftentimes, you are. Because most worthwhile things require some level of thought before acting. The problem is that preparation doesn't stay useful forever. At some point, the value starts to diminish. But what's interesting is how difficult it can be to recognize when you've crossed that line. Because when you're doing all that preparation, there's rarely, if ever, any type of warning light to indicate that it's no longer helping. To you, it can still feel productive. It can feel like it's progress, which is what makes it so easy to stay in this phase. Think about how often you hear people say, they're waiting until they know a little more. I want to go talk to one more person, get one more opinion, get a little more information before I move forward. Now, sometimes that's reasonable, but sometimes the additional information isn't solving a problem. It's delaying a decision. And the reality is that every meaningful pursuit eventually reaches a point where planning can no longer provide a more clear answer. The next lesson isn't found in another strategy session. It's found when preparation makes contact with reality. Basically, you start doing what needs to be done. You make that phone call to the client. You submit the application for that new job or position. You publish the report or your opinions of your findings. You have that conversation you're not really looking forward to. And then reality starts teaching you things preparation never could, which is the part we often forget or overlook. Planning and preparation can predict. Action reveals. The person who spends 6 months preparing to begin and the person who begins after 6 weeks are no longer solving the same problem. One is still working with assumptions. The other is collecting evidence, which is why preparation has an expiration date. Because eventually, preparing brings you to the door, but the reality only comes when you step through it. And this is where certainty or needing all the answers first has become one of the biggest limiters of action in our modern life. If you say you're doing more research, gathering more information, weighing your options, considering all the angles, or not rushing to a decision, nobody questions it. In fact, most people would probably encourage it. Because if you ask anyone, it's smart to think things through. But waiting for that certainty has a way of moving the finish line. At first, you're thinking, I just need enough information to make a good decision. Then it becomes, I need enough information to make the best decision, which then leads you to looking for enough information to guarantee what you plan to do works out the way you're imagining it. That's where things start to change. Because seeking that certainty shifts from being a tool to being a requirement. Whereas the problem is that most of life's important decisions rarely come with guarantees. You can study the financial environment and still launch a business that struggles. You can evaluate every possible option and still choose the wrong path. You can make what you believe is an informed decision and still encounter obstacles you didn't anticipate. And what's interesting is that many of us aren't actually looking for more information. We're looking for a break from the pressure of choosing, the pressure of possibly making a mistake, the pressure that once a decision is made, an outcome is guaranteed. Bottom line, certainty isn't the reward for enough preparation. It's merely a probability. And as long as the decision remains unmade, every possibility remains possible. Every version of success and failure remains uncertain. Eventually, waiting for certainty can become a place to hide because uncertainty feels uncomfortable, whereas being certain feels safe. The challenge is that growth rarely happens inside certainty. Most growth begins the moment you accept that you don't know everything, won't know everything, but are going to have to make a decision anyway. On the other hand, one of the reasons this, call it a holding pattern, can be so difficult to recognize is because preparing can often feel similar to progress. In fact, sometimes it actually feels better because progress is messy. Progress produces mistakes. Progress exposes weaknesses and inabilities. Progress creates proof that something isn't working and may need to change. Whereas preparing doesn't do any of those things. Preparing lets you stay in a place where everything still looks possible. You can spend the time building the perfect plan, organizing the perfect system, creating the perfect schedule, mapping out every phase of a project before actually beginning. And none of those things are inherently bad or wrong. The issue is that all that preparation can give you a feeling that can be mistaken for having accomplished something. The feeling is real. The question is whether the outcome is. Because there's a difference between activities that support progress and activities that are progress. We've all had those days where you felt busy. Probably you were even exhausted. Yet when you look back on your day, it was difficult to point to anything that actually moved forward. So what makes all this problematic is that nobody else can see it either. From their perspective, all of your preparation and planning appears disciplined and well thought out. And sometimes that's exactly why it lingers for so long. You're not avoiding effort. You might just be investing your efforts in aspects where your effort feels safer. But false progress is laziness. It's activity that creates the emotional reward of doing something without requiring the vulnerability of moving. Eventually, though, reality asks a simple question. What have you actually done? And there's another aspect to consider. Many times, we make the assumption that being confident about what needs to be done comes first. That One day you'll wake up and feel ready, certain, and capable, fully convinced that things are going to work out. Then that's when you'll take action. Problem is, life rarely tends to work that way. When you look at people who have done difficult things, most of them weren't operating from a place of certainty. They weren't completely confident before they started. They had doubts, questions. There were obviously concerns. They saw the risks of what could go wrong. The difference wasn't that they felt better. The difference was that they chose to act anyway. And in many instances, what follows isn't immediate success. Sometimes it's a mistake or mistakes. Sometimes there are setbacks. Sometimes it's the realization that the original plan wasn't quite as good as it seemed. But something important does happen in the process. Reality replaces what could be. You can stop wondering what might happen because you'll be experiencing what is actually happening. Because every time you do something you said you were going to do, you become someone who follows through. Someone who acts in spite of the uncertainty. Someone who doesn't require perfect conditions before taking a leap. That's where your self-respect and your self-confidence will start to grow. Not from proving yourself to other people, but from keeping promises you made to yourself, which is what many of us are actually looking for when we chase that certainty. We're looking for the feeling that we can trust ourselves. And that trust isn't built through our intentions. It's built through our behavior and our actions, which means the path is often the opposite of what we expect. We wait for that feeling of confidence so we can act, but it's the action that frequently creates the confidence. And once you realize that, you don't need nearly as much preparation before you're able to begin. Most of us aren't held back by a lack of information. For most things, there's plenty of information available. And yet people with access to the same information often end up in very different places. And that separation happens in much different moments. The moments where someone decides they've learned enough. For now. Probably they don't know everything, but they know enough to take the next step. Because agree with it or not, that's really all any of us ever has. To take the next step or not. And rarely, if ever, do we have complete certainty. We just have the opportunity to move one decision, one conversation, one action further than we were yesterday. Maybe that's why action has such a powerful effect on us. It doesn't just change our circumstances. It changes our relationship with uncertainty. Over time, you begin to realize that uncertainty isn't a signal to stop. It's not proof that you're unprepared. It's simply part of being engaged in something that hasn't happened yet. And maybe the objective isn't to eliminate uncertainty before taking action. Maybe the goal is to become the kind of person who can move while uncertainty is still present. Because life, it has this nasty habit of continuing regardless if we're ready for it. Opportunities come and go. Conversations happen or they don't. Decisions get made. Even when we postpone making a decision, we're still making the decision. And somewhere out there is your version of your life that can only be reached through your actions. As always, thanks for spending a few minutes with me. Until next time, stay sharp, stay grounded, and keep showing up.